Hey, what's up folks, this is Shahil. So, we have all heard of the Apple M1 chip. If you're into this tech game and if you've been following the tech news, you'd know that the Apple M1 has made headlines more than a couple of times. It's been all over the social media. By the way, if you're not following me on social media like Twitter and Instagram, links in the description. But anyway, if you have been following the news, you know that the M1 chip has thrown pretty great numbers at our face. But now the real question being, which one should you buy? Okay, so when you're being fed with a lot of numbers, you get the usual confusion of what to buy, since everything from the base model to the maximum offered right now has amazing performance. Well, if you're one of those, don't worry, you're stopped at the right place. Okay, so first of all, to those who don't know, what is Apple M1? Okay, so if you already know what is M1, you could just head to the description and then see the timestamps and then skip over. But M1 is a chipset that is made by Apple. So for the longest time, Apple has been transitioned from PowerPC, and ever since they've been using Intel chips. So they've been depending on Intel's new technologies for their Macs to be powered. So every time Apple wants an upgrade, they need to wait for Intel to come with something amazing so that they could update the new Mac machines. But recently, Apple has announced that they have been transitioning to the new ARM processor. First of all, in the DTK or the developer transition kit, we got the Apple A12Z Bionic chip, which is seen inside of the iPad Pro 2020. But after that, we got the first proper consumer level Apple ARM chipset, or what Apple would like to call the Apple Silicon. We got the Apple M1. So now the Apple M1 is the first generation of processors to be powered by Apple. If you want to know more about Apple's ARM transition, I've actually made a dedicated video on that, so you could watch it by clicking right there. So now they have 3 Mac machines with the new Apple M1 chipset. So we have the base model MacBook Air, base model MacBook Pro 13-inch, and then the Mac Mini. Now you might ask, what are the other machines? Like, what happened to the iMac Pro and the Mac Pro? Well, apparently, Apple won't be releasing all the machines at the same time, and it does make sense because they don't want all the machines to be going live at the same time. And so they are releasing it in, specific order or something. Apple has that. So in like a 2-year mark, from 2 years from now on, they'll be releasing all the Macs if Apple is going to keep their word. So to decide on which Mac you should buy, you should ask yourself this question. What kind of a user are you? So you might be asking, what do you mean by that? Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. What is your use case defines what kind of user are you. Let me explain. So there's the casual user. Casual user is someone who browses the internet, watches YouTube, watches videos, movies, TV shows, like pretty lightweight tasks that won't put effort on the computer. So they could get away with the MacBook Air easily, and I'd be talking more about that why later. But a casual user is someone who doesn't need much power in their computer anyway. And then there's the ultimate extreme, like the opposite end of the spectrum, which is the power user who needs like a lot of power for their works. Like their work is dependent on the computer's power. So some example of that would be video editing, 3D rendering, 3D modeling. For all that to happen, you need a computer that you can rely on, ultimately depend on. So that is the power user. And then right in between both of these, there's a mid-level user. So the mid-level user is someone who needs a bit of power because they'd be doing things like opening up like 10 tabs at the same time, or like multitasking. So those guys would need some power in their computer, but not all the power. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory. Once you have answered this question to yourself, you need to be asking which Mac you should buy now. Because now that your use case is clear, most people would have a pretty clear idea on what to choose. But if you don't, I'll guide you. First thing, the casual users. Okay, so the casual users are pretty simple, easy recommendation, the MacBook Air. Because the MacBook Air has a great display, great size, compact, not so much heavy, it's pretty lightweight, it has amazing battery life right now with the M1 chip, so it's an easy recommendation. Now, considering that in the future you won't be doing any kind of editing or anything serious like that, you can pick up the MacBook Air pretty safe. The main reason I say that is because the MacBook Air does not have a fan. So you might be asking, then how is it cooled? Well, because now they're using an ARM processor, just like in the iPhone and the iPad, the MacBook Air doesn't have so much power that you need a fan to cool it, is what Apple says. And I think that's pretty cool. Sometimes the MacBook Air gets a bit warm, but not like too hot. But if you're doing and pushing it to its limits, you might experience thermal throttling, and that's what we have seen so far. And for the middle level user, you could either choose the MacBook Air if you're not going to be like editing a lot of things, like casual photo editing and 1080p cutting clips. That's going to be pretty fine. But like if you're going to that editing mark, like if you're going to that GPU dependent, CPU dependent mark, then go for the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Because the MacBook Air, again, there's a slight chance that it could thermal throttle and like give up on you. So just to be safe, go pick the MacBook Pro 13-inch. Now let's get into the power user. So power users are pretty simple. Again, easy recommendation, the MacBook Pro 13 or the Mac Mini. So it is a choice right now. The power users are in a bit of a trouble too, because right now we don't have the 16-inch MacBook Pro or the iMac or the iMac Pro. So if you need something that is very powerful for something like 3D modeling or 3D rendering, just wait. Don't do anything right now. Just don't pull the trigger on the MacBook Pro or the Mac Mini. Wait and then go get the MacBook Pro 16-inch whenever that comes out with the M1X or anything, or whatever they decide to call it. Just wait for that and go grab that machine. But if like 4K video editing and all your use cases, just go for the MacBook Pro 13-inch if you're pretty sure that you'll be traveling often, or like you want to edit on the go, or you want to go to a coffee shop and then edit, or you want to sit in the park and then edit. Just go for the MacBook Pro 13-inch. But like most of the people, when they choose their editing setup, it's going to be stagnant. It's going to be like at a desk, sitting at a desk and doing stuff. So for those kinds of things, just don't go buy the MacBook Pro 13, because the Mac Mini has a better cooling system, and if you're going to be at the desk anyway, you don't need the computer to be having like a lot of great battery life and stuff. So the Mac Mini makes perfect sense. But I think that you're having a pretty good idea right now. The point being, please do not buy the MacBook Air expecting that you could do a lot of video editing on it, because again, I need to remind you that like it's a laptop that does not have an active cooling system. Like even when it had an active cooling system, it didn't perform much on like video editing and stuff. Like if you're on to editing, like slight photo editing, maybe Lightroom, maybe a bit of Photoshop, but if you're not into editing like 4K clips and stuff, then you're pretty safe. But if you're into serious video editing or professional work, then please don't go with the MacBook Air just because it has the M1 and it's cheap. Like one of the most important things that you need to note is that Apple had shown us that the MacBook Air could handle serious video editing, but that is in ProRes. ProRes is a codec which is developed by Apple, and you might be able to guess that it is expected, it is optimized for Final Cut Pro and then other Apple computers. So if you're editing ProRes, then maybe there's a chance that you could get away with the MacBook Air, but most people are editing something like the H.264 codec. Like right now, I'm shooting on a Canon 80D, and then this footage is going to be transferred to YouTube or uploaded to YouTube in H.264. So for those folks who are like editing H.264, it doesn't make sense to go get a MacBook Air for editing 4K video. Harsh Punjabi from Technoloba has actually made a video on the MacBook Air, and he actually shows the performance of the MacBook Air and other stuff like that. I'll link it down in the description and also in the iCards right there, so you could go watch that. If you're someone who uses Adobe's apps for editing like Premiere Pro, Photoshop, Lightroom, even though Rosetta 2 does a pretty good job at translating the apps, please don't buy that for like depending on that machine. Because the reason being, those apps are not clearly optimized for the M1 MacBook Air. And even though Lightroom and Photoshop performs pretty well in Rosetta 2, I think that the optimized versions are going to be like in the future. Like Adobe has been like not so good at optimizing apps and not so good at pushing updates pretty fast. So if you're not the user of any of the Adobe apps like Photoshop, Lightroom in the PC, then go get the new Macs, because it makes perfect sense considering that any other apps that you might be using are already optimized or running pretty well in Rosetta 2. But right now, that is all we have. I want to see the Mac Pro using the Apple Silicon. Like, what would that be capable of? Like, comment down below what do you think. Anyway, that's in the future, and that future It's going to be pretty exciting. But until then, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give my channel a sub and also like the video and share it with your friends and family. Until we meet the next time, goodbye.